morning, everyone. It is July the 14th at 8:32 a.m. in the morning. We will call this City Council Budget Workshop in order. We have every single council member present, so of course that means we have a quorum. So with that, let me just remind everybody that all members of the council and staff should begin speaking by stating their full name and their SMD position or role within the city. We have not received any public comments today, so we will move right into our workshop agenda. And the first item A is a discussion of matters regarding the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget preparation, including but not limited to 1, Public Works Operating Funds revenue and expenditures, and then 2 other items needing council direction. So let's start with item 1.
Mayor Tina Diersky, Director of Finance.
Good morning, Tina.
Good morning, Mayor. I will start here with our, we're starting today with our budget workshops. This is our first of 3, and starting with our enterprise funds. We're starting with the Public Works enterprise funds today with 4 of our funds from water, water reclamation, solid waste, and stormwater. You'll see here on all 4 of these funds, there are not many changes. There were no changes to rates. And so there are very little changes to revenues or expenditures on any of these, but we would be happy to entertain any questions that you might have. The decrease in revenue to the water fund is solely due to a decrease in expected interest income.
Talk to us about the interest percentage we had been using versus what we think is going to be the interest for this.
Yes, ma'am. We were experiencing interest rates of over 2%, and we're expecting interest rates of less than 0.5% for the coming fiscal year. And so that led us to a decrease of about $250,000 just to the water fund in particular, but also another $250,000 decrease to the water fund because of the interest income that they received from the Lake Nasworthy Fund, which is a result of the ballot that the voters voted on.
But will we be receiving
$100,000?
Will we be receiving interest on the water? I mean, the dollar amount that we're going to be using for the sewer line, or where is it sitting, and where is it not receiving any interest?
Good question, Mayor. Actually, we'll be transferring that money. So the $6 million for the voter approved projects will be moved into Fund 502. So that will earn interest in that fund. And the remaining that we approved for the sewer fund will be in the sewer funds and also earning interest there.
All right. So what we're right now, as of June or end of June, as we're into July, what interest rate are we receiving currently, and what impact will that have on our existing budget?
So we were experiencing greater than 2% in the recent history before COVID hit. Right now we're seeing interest rates of maybe 0.5%. So it's going to have a pretty significant impact, not only on the water fund, sewer fund, all of these funds we're discussing today, as well as the general fund and all of our other funds.
All right, so we're looking at the budget and looking at a $729,000 difference in the plan. But what problem do we have right now in this fund based off of interest and the current budget?
So we have a $500,000 impact to our budget in the water fund due to interest. The remaining, and obviously that's approximate estimates. The remaining $250,000 is due to the decrease from the lease at the Hickory. And that could come back up in the next year, but we're waiting to see if that lease comes back online. So yes, ma'am.
So we have no lease currently on the Hickory?
I would ask Allison if she could speak to that. I think we still have a lease, but I think that it's going to terminate and that we hope to renew it. But I would ask Allison Strube to answer.
Allison Strube, Director of Water Utilities. The lease that we had this fiscal year did terminate in the May time period. That lease was for 3 years since we purchased the Ford Ranch. We are looking at short-term leases and how we can accommodate those while still having good marketability of the Ford Ranch sale. And so we did not budget for lease income in this upcoming fiscal year. But if we do enter into a new lease, we would amend the budget at that time to account for that revenue and expense.
All right, but we're 6 weeks into no lease, so no one's paying us for anything. It's just empty, and that was the lease for hunting, or at least for running cattle.
That was the previous lease we had was for hunting and cattle.
But did they move all the cattle off the land?
Yes, they did. They did pass last November.
Do I have questions from council for Allison or for Tina on this fund? On the revenue, we're just talking revenue right now. So any questions on revenue?
Mayor?
Yes, Billy.
Billy DeWitt, Single Member District 6. When I look at the financial summary for the water fund revenue, I noticed that, it remains flat. So are we not planning on, Allison, any type of water rate increase for the upcoming year?
No, ma'am, we are not planning a water rate increase for this upcoming fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
And we would be anticipating then that we would sell the same amount, or the usage of water would be the same this year as last year. Is that traditional that it's flat year after year after year?
Yes, ma'am. For this upcoming fiscal year, we did budget flat in sales. The previous fiscal year, FY20, had 3 months of 2019 rates and then 9 months of 2020 rates based off the fiscal year versus calendar year rate increases. We budgeted flat for this upcoming fiscal year as a conservative amount to account for some of that decreased usage that we are experiencing right now due to COVID.
Okay, so any other questions on the revenue side before we go down to the expenditure line?
Billy DeWitt, Single Member District 6. I have one other question. On the summary, it says that we are anticipating an increase in lake use revenues. And I wonder, it's not that much, but I just wondered what that anticipated increase is.
Councilmember DeWitt, that is due to lake leases out at the lake for those properties that have not sold or have not purchased their property. Those lake lease rates were 1.5% in 2019, and for 2020 and 2021, those go up to 2%. Also, Cindy Priest let me know that some of the market values have gone up on some of those properties. So this additional $77,000 is due to the additional income that we'll receive from the lake leases of residential properties.
All right, thank you.
All right, let's go down to the expenditure lines. We'll start with, obviously the big one is capital, was a $2.9 million difference in capital. Can we talk through what was budgeted in 2019, 2020, and what we're looking at for 2021? I should have said 2019, 2020, I don't know if I said that, versus this year's budget plan.
A large portion of the increase to capital and the increase to O&M is due to the new Texas Water Development Board loan we received for the expansion of the Hickory project, where we do have additional debt requirements. So little over $2 million went to fund debt, which is in the O&M line. And so that ultimately decreased the capital line by that amount.
All right, so you 22,997 was the 2,384 increase is based off of the water fund, the money we borrowed to continue to develop the Hickory Aquifer. Is that correct? And that's the debt payment?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And then talk again about why the capital is down 2.9 million.
So we also, as we discussed in the revenue line, we are, while we're budgeting flat for sales, some of our other income is decreasing, interest and from the Lake Nasworthy Trust Fund. So we do have money that we're trying to make basically decreased revenue. And so that also eliminated dollars from the capital line to balance the budget.
Okay, council, do we have questions for Allison on this expenditure piece of the water fund?
Mayor,
Yes.
I have a question, just a simple one. But this is Lacey Gonzalez, single member District 4. I was wanting to ask Allison, for the people that are watching this, can you tell us what the O&M is for?
Operation and maintenance covers a multitude of things, from maintenance at the water treatment plant, chemicals to treat the water, anything that is a fixed structure, pump repairs, water line replacements, water leak fixes, fire hydrants, all of those type of things. Anything that is not a bid out project, going to a contractor to replace, like a Bell Street type project, and isn't personnel, is accounted for in the O&M line. So the O&M line also covers debt service for those previous bond issuances.
I would assume that the biggest part of O&M is the debt service. Would it be the largest percentage of the O&M?
Yes, ma'am. 25% of this budget is going to debt service of the entire budget.
Thank you, Allison.
Any other questions from council or comments to be made?
Yeah, I have one, Mayor.
Go ahead, Tommy.
Allison, obviously with cutting our capital budget in half, is there anything that is being, are we not doing some things that we should be to keep up so that we don't get behind in future years with this decrease in our capital budget this year? Is there some things we should be anticipating that we might have to do that may come up in the future?
To keep up with the street program, obviously we've been trying to cash fund that as much as possible. And we have built up a fund balance for some of those items, and to also have that 75 days of cash on hand as was projected with the rate increases. So with the decrease to capital, it may be that we have to dip into that fund balance to keep cash funding some of those capital projects. But that is, I guess a good thing that we have built up a fund balance to do that.
Right.
So the fund balance will cover what we need to do in terms of capital expenditures,
Yes,
we
ma'am.
believe at this point.
Yes, and we still have, obviously, we took it down, but we still have, can the slides go back up so I can see those numbers?
Just give us a minute.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
So we still have the $2.9 million to still account for capital projects. So anything above that, we could discuss the use of fund balance at that point.
And that will come before council, one project at a time.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Tommy. Further questions or comments? All right, with none, let's go to the next slide. Okay, the Water Reclamation Fund, who's on?
I'll be happy to
Speaking.
answer questions, but the main decrease, as with the water fund, is the decrease to interest for the revenue. Similar to water rates, we are budgeting flat as the previous fiscal year, and no rate increases with wastewater charges.
And so I would assume, obviously, there's a minimal decrease in capital here, and then an increase in O&M. So again, my assumption is that with the fund balance we have, which again is over and above the 75 days, we can cover any issues that might come up. And you're shaking your head yes?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
everybody said yes.
Yes,
ma'am.
that is correct.
Council, questions, comments on revenue and or expenditures? All right, with none, let's move on to the next.
Mayor Tina Darsky, Director of Finance again. We are moving on to solid waste fund. There are very few changes again here as well. The main decrease to revenue is just, again, an offset to the interest income that we're seeing, the 0.5% interest income versus the 2%. And so we are projecting conservatively to account for that as well. There's a slight decrease in personnel, and the capital that's decreasing to offset the source of revenue.
All right, in this fund, we obviously are having a little bit of increase, unlike the others where we were planning a flat to the previous year's budget. What we keep looking at is a previous year's budget. And certainly we have in front of us our blue book, but based off of where we're at currently on the existing budget, not the initial budget, how are we doing on this fund?
This fund performs very well. It's based mostly on a contractual agreement. And so those revenues seem to come in as they are supposed to. But I would speak to Shane or Patrick to give us some more information on how the actual operations are going at the landfill.
Everything at the landfill and with our solid waste contract is performing as it should currently right now. We are continuing to perform well in building our fund balance as we look into the next, 5, 6, 7 years out, as we're looking, projecting to look at the expansion of the landfill, whether that's a new permit or whether that's expanding our existing permit. However, the best economics work out as we kind of move into the future with that. So, but everything currently in this fund is performing very well.
So you have no concerns about the user fees on this one?
No, currently with the contract that we have in place right now, we do have small increases built in over the initial 10-year contract. As we move into the next phase, at the end of the 10 years, we will look at those percentage increases that are increased every year to see if they need to be adjusted at that time. But currently, everything seems to be performing very well. We're on target where we need to be.
Yeah, because at end of May, with 67% of the year last year, you've realized 76%, I think, or 72%. So you're a little above plan, or yeah, a little above plan currently. So that would reflect that.
Yep. And we've seen, and that was due to an increase in the tonnage going across the scales at the landfill. So we have seen an increase in tonnage. With the oil field kind of course, the whole COVID-19 thing and everybody staying at home kind of threw the numbers off just a little bit where we were expecting to see them. So as the oil field fell off, we were expecting to see our landfill tonnages decrease a little bit because we were seeing a lot of tonnage coming out of the oil field. But with COVID-19 and everybody staying home and everybody cleaning out their garages and all of the cleaning they were doing, we actually saw an increase on that side of things to take the place of the decrease from the oil field. So, but we expect that to kind of flatten out and level out as we move into these, fall and winter months. We expect those numbers to fall back into our normal range. And so, but again, everything's performing very well.
Thank you, Shane. Okay, any other questions or comments from council? All right, with none, let's move on to the next slide. I'm assuming that's stormwater.
Yes, ma'am. Stormwater fund, again, very little decrease in revenue, mostly associated with interest income.
And why is there personnel increase here?
The ink, okay, the
Yeah, you're on.
increase, okay, they started the, and Tina, you'll have to help me, all the allocation that we do with the,
Oh, the workers' comp,
no, not the workers' comp,
the indirect costs.
the cost allocation, I'm sorry. Yeah. The
Yeah.
indirect cost allocation is we moved that around. Some of that was moved this last year. And when we were looking at, because we used to pay directly for some of the, some services that were like GIS and some other services we paid directly for. And we kind of reworked and rearranged how we handled those this year through the indirect cost allocation. We started paying them through the indirect cost allocation versus paying directly. So that's where we saw some of the increases and decreases and kind of shifting of how we are actually handling the fund internally.
Okay. Questions from council? I see on May 31st, 67% of the year had lapsed and our total revenues were at 67%. So we look like we're right on budget for the existing or current year. And it looks like our expenditures for current year through May are only 47%. So it looks like we're either going to have some late expenditures that are not in this May up to May numbers, or we just are going to conserve more on our expenditures.
It looks like to me, Mayor, the lines that are low for expenditures or capital and contingencies. Looks like Shane and his crew are trying to hold back on expenditures, but I'll let him speak to that.
Okay.
Correct. We've been trying to hold back on expenditures too. So there's even with the capital items moving forward, we're trying to again hold back as much as we can. We've seen a significant increase in the cost of some of the equipment that we're purchasing, and as we move into the next year's budget, of course, in this fund we did set aside or let fall the fund balance every year a certain amount for equipment replacement. So you will see as we move into this next year's budget, you will see a budget amendment fairly soon to pull some of our fund balance back up into our operating expenses so we can start some of our equipment replacement. This year we did, of course, we did just approve the last council meeting the purchase of a couple of tractors. So we'll see that encumbrance and expense hit this line item as well too, but we are trying to be as conservative as we can. Some of the other reasons for the expenditures is that we've had some staffing issues and some mechanical issues that have actually slowed us down as to where we need to be from a mowing perspective and things like that as well too. But as we get these new tractors in, we start picking back up on our, hopefully we get some employees hired back and we start picking up on our services. We'll actually start moving again at a little better pace to match, better match the budget. However, if we can be conservative, we always are. And so especially as we coming into these tighter times that we definitely don't want to overexpend what our revenue is going to come in.
In all of these various funds, from the stormwater fund, the solid waste fund, the water fund, talk to me about the amount of equipment we're looking to purchase, because one of the things that happens is we as a council on a continual basis, particularly in a consent agenda, see a lot of new purchases of tractors, trucks, mowers, sweepers, whatever. So
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to know, in the funds that we've just talked about, what are the numbers of new equipment, number of pieces, dollar amount that's in these budgets?
Yes, ma'am. So open up that conversation. I will tell you that these funds are enterprise funds. They're meant to pay for their own expenditures. And so they have a budget set aside every year for how much equipment they would like to replace. And of course, that's fluid depending on if a piece of machinery goes out, they have to replace it. but they do have a kind of at least a set plan in place to replace those equipment pieces. And so I would speak to Shane and Allison both to let them kind of discuss with you how they project those replacements.
Yeah, I can lead off on that. We normally, when we sit down, we start coming into this time of year as we're starting our budget and our budget planning cycle. Of course, we sit down with Ryan Kramer, our fleet services manager, and we visit with him, and we go through all of our equipment, and we look at the mileage, we look at the repair costs, we look at all of those different factors that are involved when we start looking at replacing equipment, and age, those type things as well too. And then once we go through those and we kind of prioritize out of that list what we need to review and what we need to look at as we move into in through the budget process and through the year. And so we try to set aside what we think we're going to have or what we really need to have as part of that replacement program. And I think the same is very true on the water side, water fund, and the sewer side as well too. So as we're going through, and we do this all through the general fund as well. So it's not just in these enterprise funds, it's throughout the entire organization that we go through and we look at all these and try to prioritize a list and assign what monies we can within this. This year, as we're moving in through this next year into the 2021 season, we came out of our, and I'm gonna call it's industry term yellow iron, which is our backhoes and our wheel loaders, our bulldozers, road graders, those type things right there. We've been in a lease program. We've come out of that lease program, and we're coming up to the end of the life expectancy on many of those pieces of equipment, not all of them, but many of them. And so we are looking this year at going back out, because the interest rates are very favorable currently right now. We're going to go back out and look at, again, doing that same type of lease purchase program for our yellow iron equipment. And so you will see a large number of equipment come across this next year as we're doing this. Of course, that'll be more of a one lump sum type thing as we're looking to do it in two different phases. One will be for the financing part of it, the lease option part of it, and then two, of course, for the equipment itself. And so as we move across, we'll be bringing that to y'all, to council, as we move into this next year. Again, that'll be more of a one-time lump sum, but we'll also have a lot of on the stormwater fund this year, looking at a new equipment hauling trailer for the stormwater division. There'll be, and of course, a pickup or two, be the same, as we go into the other funds. You start looking at the water fund, the general fund, sewer fund. We'll be buying vehicles, pickups, replacement vehicles. Of course, police and fire, looking at patrol vehicles, ambulance replacements, all of those type things as we move through the year. And of course, like Tina said, it's kind of a fluid document because we plan out so far ahead, out 6, 8, 9 months. We're looking at what we're going to try to do next year, and we can lose different pieces of equipment throughout that year. So whether that's blowing up an engine or whether that's we could anything that tears up the equipment.
And I get it, Shane, because there are things that happen that you don't expect in terms of equipment. But generally speaking, if we looked at the 2019-2020 budget, what's the dollar amount we reinvested in equipment, and what would be the amount we plan for in this budget, dollar amount? And then I would assume throughout what that dollar amount is, it depends on what piece of equipment becomes most important or blows up on us along the way. But there's got to be a dollar amount that we put into this budget that along the way we keep, comes to council for approval. But it'd be nice to know, what is the 2021 budget amount for equipment lease / purchase?
Okay. Then in the stormwater fund, we're looking at roughly $400,000 is what we will spend in the 2021 budget on equipment replacement and new equipment. When we look at as far as fleet wise, Allison can probably speak to her what she kind of has set aside in her budgets as well in the general fund. We roughly spend about 1.25 million is what comes out of the general fund.
That's
Okay.
right, Shane. That's the amount that we transfer from general fund to our equipment replacement fund in Fund 501.
So you're gonna say about $1.2 million?
In the
Yes,
general
ma'am.
fund, yes,
Yeah.
that's
For general
that's
fund,
where
yes.
That pays for the equipments that we use in these funds.
And
we,
for the water-
1.2 is out of the general. Like I said, we'll in total after we bring back the budget amendment in the stormwater fund after the beginning of the new fiscal year, we're looking at approximately 400,000.
Yeah.
Will be that number. Of course, it'll be depending on the price of the street sweeper when we get ready to replace it. But those are real close approximate numbers. And again, Allison probably has some numbers in the water and the sewer funds that she tries to target from her end as well too. And I can't speak to those off the top of my head right now.
And I would say again, Mayor, these are enterprise funds, so they're meant to build up these funds to replace that equipment. So they, one of their goals is to,
I get it that we're trying to build it up. I get all of that.
okay, yes,
I
ma'am.
also get that throughout the year, these things come forward to us in the consent agenda to approve. So somewhere in here, we have an estimate in a budget, regardless of whether it's general fund or within these specific enterprise funds of equipment that need to be purchased. And I know you
Yes,
can't
ma'am.
specify which piece of equipment it is, but somewhere in the budget, there's a dollar amount for replacement of equipment.
Yes, ma'am. And of course, obviously, I know that you and the council are very aware and of how those expenditures are made. I was more saying that for the general public, but I would speak to Allison to talk to how water and sewer equipment replacement works.
For water fund, for both machinery and vehicles, we're budgeting about $670,000 for those replacement. And in the wastewater fund, we don't have as big of a fleet, or the water reclamation fund. So it's about $450,000 for those asset replacements there.
Right. Perfect. And we realize that it is fluid. We realize that something happens to equipment, but just so we kind of understand, because when it comes to council, meeting after meeting after meeting for 100 here, 200, whatever the numbers are, we don't realize what the total amount is in the total budget, and nor do we, when we are approving it one item at a time, realize what the cumulative amount of new purchases or leases of equipment are. So it's just being a little more obvious in terms of what these funds are buying for us and what our needs are, because when we talk about $1.2 million, 670,000, 400,000, 450,000, it's a lot of dollars, and they're obviously needed. It's not challenging the need for it. It's just identifying the total dollar amount. That's all I'm asking for. It's not challenging the need. That's all. So thank you for having those numbers available. Okay.
Mayor,
Yes, Tom.
and this one goes to Shane. Shane, you don't have to bounce back on, but I know when you're looking at equipment purchases, especially your yellow iron and things like that, with the energy market the way it is, do you pursue any of that through maybe the lightly used market, or do we have to go brand new? I know there's a lot of equipment out there, and especially when you're talking about trailers and equipment of the such that's, at a 20, 30, 40% discount to buying it new, and it may be just as good. So I don't know if you look at that when you pursue it, Shane, or not, but I would think with the current situation, that might be an avenue for us to follow.
Yes, sir, we do especially on more single item type purchases. If we are looking at an RGN or a single type function, we do. If the vendors out there do have a a piece of machinery that fits our need, and it is within a condition and a price range that we believe is very reasonable, then yes, we do pursue those as well. Some of our bigger purchases, when we look at doing, as we go out for this lease purchase on this newer equipment, then we look on some of this bigger yellow iron. When we're talking about 18 backhoes and 6 to 8 wheel loaders, and we start looking at some of those bigger ticket things, when we start looking at that, the municipal discounts on new equipment sometimes far outweigh what the private sector, even on a reduced price used machine, go for. We can actually, from a municipal discount standpoint, we can actually get better pricing on new machines with an extended 5-year, 7-year warranty than we can looking at some of those private sector used machines. So those are a lot of the different things that we look at as we work through these figures and these numbers.
All right. Thank you, Shane.
Sure.
Good question, Tom. Council, anyone have additional questions or comments or further explanations that you want? Okay, doesn't seem like so. All right, next.
Mayor, that is the end of the Public Works Enterprise Funds. And so if council has no further questions, I think that concludes our discussion.
Do we have a line item? I'm not sure where it is on insurance issues. Anything outstanding or obvious issues as it relates to problems that create higher insurance issues?
That would fall under Human Resources and Brian Kendrick, and I don't know if he's on the call, but ma'am, we haven't seen, we've seen a lot of insurance proceeds coming in to cover some of the costs of like roofs at Fort Concho. We've seen insurance proceeds for traffic signals. We've seen them for vehicles in our fleet services. As far as the cost of insurance, that would be a question for Brian because that falls under his jurisdiction.
Well, let's talk about the $100,000 budget amendment that we approved at the last city council meeting. Go into detail what that $100,000 was about.
For the traffic signals?
No.
Which one?
We had a budget amendment, I believe, last city council for $100,000. Is that because of increased accidents and damage and payouts because of accidents, or is it totally the missing or the?
Yes, ma'am. I believe that was in anticipation of expenditures for traffic signals that had been hit through accidents. I think that Shane or Patrick might be able to speak better to that since traffic falls under them.
Is that what that 100,000 was?
Correct. That 100,000 was how we fund a lot of these things, because you know, when a traffic signal goes down or it's one of those top devices that, you know, is critical to infrastructure, we need to be able to replace that fairly quickly. So we budget for anticipated proceeds with this. And of course, our expenditures, unfortunately, this year with all the knockdowns and damage that was occurred within the traffic systems this year exceeded what we had normally budgeted for it. And so we had to come back and ask for a budget amendment of an anticipated an additional 100,000 for this year. As we're still looking, we have, you know, a couple of months left, a good couple of months left in this year. And of course, with a 25, you know, one pole and a mast arm are 25 to 30,000 to set. It doesn't take many knockdowns to run into 100,000. And so, but on that 100,000, if we need it, we use it, and then it's reimbursed to us through insurance proceeds.
Right.
If we do not need it, we don't use it. So it's just sitting out there and basically just is a wash at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Okay, so that I believe completes our budget workshop information for today. We are asking council members if there are other items that you want to have presented or questions that you might have, so that city staff will be prepared for our meeting, which will be Tuesday, 2 weeks from today, which would be Tuesday. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but I believe it's the 28th of July. We will be meeting again for the next piece of this budget session. So anything, council, that you want to put out there as a question or you want reviewed ahead of time? And if not, obviously, over the next week, you can give us some input, but just think about anything after today's session that you might want further information on. All right, with that, then we will have a motion for adjournment. Do I have one?
So moved.
So moved by Tom Thompson in a second.
Second.
By
Mayor?
Tom. Yes, and so with that, Tina, go ahead.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, Mayor. We did have one question for the council. We were considering moving the general fund budget workshop to August 13th instead of August 11th.
MPO meeting planned for that morning, and unless we have that MPO meeting moved or changed, that is a second Thursday of every month MPO meeting, so we'll need to no. All right, so we've talked to Major Holfines, who says he doesn't think we're gonna have an MPO meeting, so with that, we could move it to that Thursday, which would be August the 13th.
Mayor, if I could elaborate, we will get sales tax numbers for August on that Wednesday. And so that was the reason we had anticipated trying to move it to Thursday, so that we had one more month of sales tax numbers before we project general fund revenues.
Any concerns or questions from council on changing that date? There isn't any, so we will go ahead and move that date to August the 13th. And with that, I have a motion in a second, and now we'll take a vote on adjournment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.